Now we'll take up the text of the poem and read the text of the poem and explain the poem, what P.B. Shelley has to say in this poem. This poem is divided into 5 stanzas. So let's take up the first stanza of the poem, Ode to the West Wind by P.B. Shelley. O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being, thou from whose unseen presence the leaves dead are driven, like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing, yellow and black and pale and hectic red, pestilence-stricken multitudes. O thou who chariotest to their dark wintry bed the winged seeds, where they lie cooled and low, each like a corpse within its grave, until their azure sister of the spring shall blow her clarion over the dreaming earth and fill driving sweet buds like fox to feed in air with living hues and odorous plain and hill, wild spirit which art moving everywhere, destroyer and preserver, hear, oh hear. Now that was the first stanza of the poem Ode to the West Wind. Now it begins, as the poem begins, and if you look at the very first verse of this poem, O wild west wind, thou breath of the autumn's being. Now what we get the impression of this wind is that it is an animate thing. Now he has personified this wind, and as if wind is a human being, as if wind is an animate object, because he uses the word breath, and breath signifies life, and he says, oh wild west wind. And this wild west wind is the breath of the autumn, which means it brings life to the autumn. Now autumn is a season when almost life comes to the halt. Leaves are dead, flowers are gone, greenery is over, and most part of the universe is like dead. There is no spice in life anymore. But it is the west wind which then comes up and breathes life into the autumn. Thou from whose unseen presence the leaves dead are driven. Now there are 2 contradictions at the very beginning of this poem. First, it seems to be an animate thing, but in the very second verse, wind takes the image or stance of something that is unseen. Now it becomes spiritual, it becomes a force which cannot be seen. So if it cannot be seen, so it could be a spirit. It's no more now a personified and animated object or animated being, which was a suggestion in the very first verse, and in the very second verse it changes into a spirit. Now what we have, wind, we have west wind, but this west wind is in the form of a spirit, because it's unseen, as he says, thou from whose unseen presence, the presence of it could be felt but could not be seen. Now what does the presence of wild west, of this west wind do, or what does west wind do? It leaves dead are driven. It drives away the dead leaves. Now those dead leaves are the autumnal leaves, the leaves of the plants which have grown pale and have fallen, and now comes the west wind, and it moves them. Now there could be two interpretations of this. Either those dead leaves are driven away, or it is the west wind which would come maybe in March or April, when spring comes, and it is a spring which will pour more blood into the plants, and the plants start growing buds, and so those dead leaves are driven, and the trees or the plants and most of the life comes back to the life. But then he says that these dead leaves are driven like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing. Now that is a comparison that he is making. How are these dead leaves driven away? They are driven away like someone drives away a ghost, a magician who comes and who would cast a spell upon the ghost, and the ghost will run away, will flee. This is how these dead leaves are driven, and once they are driven away, the problem is cured. What was the problem? The problem was of the dead leaves. And when the dead leaves are driven away, what we would be left with would be leaves with life, would be green leaves. And then he says, these dead leaves, what kind of dead leaves are? Then he says, yellow and black and pale and hectic red, pestilence-stricken multitudes. This is autumn. The leaves in the autumn can be of any color, but they cannot be of green color. They cannot be of green. As it says that they are yellow and they are black and they are pale and they are hectic red. They are pestilence-stricken, as if some disease has caught them. But before West Wind has come, before West Wind has driven those pestilence-stricken leaves away, there were no green leaves. O thou who chariotest to their dark wintry bed the winged seeds. Now, then he says that what does this wild west wind do? It puts those seeds, winged seeds, where who chariotest to their dark wintry bed the winged seeds where they lie cooled and low. Now these seeds in the winter, they do not blossom, they do not blow. So they usually, when they are in their dark wintry beds, they are almost dead. But once the spring comes, once the summer comes, it's those seeds which will grow into the plants, into the trees. The birds start coming out of these seeds. Anything that would be left underground or in the soil, each like a corpse within its grave, until thine azure sister of spring shall blow her clarion over the dreaming earth. Now these dead seeds, these winged seeds, where do they rest? They rest in their dark wintry beds. When? During autumn. When? During winter. Till the azure sister, that is spring, the spring season comes. And once it comes, what would it do? It would blow its clarion over the dreaming earth. What is a clarion? Clarion would be an alarming bell, a shrill sound, which say for example this west wind, which drives away all the hecticness, all the pestilence-stricken leaves, all the lifelessness from this universe, and pours in life into every object, into every seed, into every plant, into every tree, into every leaf, and suddenly the whole universe comes back to life. And fill driving sweet buds like fox to feed in air with living hues and odors plain and hill. So what would this wild west wind do, or the azure sister spring do to the world? It will fill whole universe with life. It will rejuvenate everything. It will pour blood into trees, spice into trees, and everything in the world turns beautiful. It smells beautiful. It looks beautiful. Wild spirit which art moving everywhere. Now he again would call this wind wild spirit, a spirit which is unseen, which cannot be seen, but it can be felt, and it is a very forceful power which has rejuvenated which has brought whole universe back to the life. Destroyer and preserver, hear, oh hear. Now this wind, this wild west wind, is both destroyer and preserver. It is destroyer. It would destroy autumn. It would destroy dead leaves. It would destroy everything that doesn't have life in it. But then it is preserver. It will preserve the beauty. It will preserve the life. It will preserve the plants. It will preserve the trees by giving life back to them. Now that was the first stanza of the poem Ode to the West Wind. Now what we understand from this poem is that this wind about which P.B. Shelley is talking is very powerful, is very forceful, is something that is an agent of change, that is an agent of energy. But the energy that this west wind would bring with itself is not a negative energy, but a positive energy. As it drives the dead leaves and brings in place of them buds with life, with, as it says, sweet buds like forks to feed in the air. Now it would bring in place of the pestilence stricken leaves are yellow, black, hectic, pale. Those leaves, they would be replaced with green leaves with buds, which would signify life.